Good. Now that we have everyone with us, I would love to hand it over to our moderator of the day, Julia Kirby. She's a member of the steering committee of this very conference that you're attending and also a senior editor at Harvard University Press. So with that, everyone, please mute yourself, turn off your videos, and Julia, please take it away.
Thank you, Sophie. So welcome everyone to our Thinkers Corner dialogue with the brilliant John Hagel. He's a longtime friend of the Drucker Forum. Perhaps if you've participated in the past, you will have seen him there. He's also a contributor many times over to Harvard Business Review and other business publications. So we're going to spend the next 40 some minutes together, and we'll divide up the time in this way. First, we'll give John a chance to tell us a little bit, give us just a brief intro to what he's been thinking about lately. And then I'll ask some questions to probe some of that territory a little further. And then I'll bring everyone else into the conversation because, you know, by then, having heard where John's work is taking him, I'm sure you'll all have your own questions and also insights to share. So first, a quick introduction to John, you know, as a thinker. I guess, you know, those of us who've been students of management, you know, for longer than we care to say, might remember that his first major book was Net Gain. That was written back in 1997. So I'm thinking, you know, he must have started writing that book about 10 minutes after he bought his first book on Amazon, because that's how long ago in digital history this was. And he was writing about that curious new thing called the web and how we should expect it to give rise to new kinds of communities. For example, customer communities and the new power that they would wield. And then he followed that up. It was Net Gain, and he followed it up with Net Worth. And by now there have been several other books. So I first had the great pleasure of editing John when he and John C. Lee Brown were working on the ideas that went into their book called The Only Sustainable Edge. And that only sustainable edge, they were saying, boiled down to just a couple of things. One was productive friction, another was dynamic specialization. And I remember we worked together on an article on productive friction. You can still find it on the Harvard Business Review website. But for me, that was just really fun and instructive to see how those two great minds kind of batted ideas off each other and came up with theories that were kind of both intellectually compelling and also had strong practical implications. So this is a great opportunity for you to see the same, to get a sense of how John does what he does so well. So John, as for the topic of this conversation, so you told us that the thing that was really captivating you lately is the idea that leaders are not good enough, I guess, not thinking enough about asking questions or asking powerful questions. So why don't we start with you just spending a chunk of time here, just taking us through that line of thinking a little. And I guess I would just start with a question. Aren't CEOs, you know, barking questions at people all the time? Like why are we talking about a deficit of questions? Is it asking the wrong kinds of questions? Anyway, please start us out here.
Wow, big topic. Where do we get started? I think certainly to your question, the leaders ask questions all the time. Two things. One is the questions they're asking tend to be in the privacy of leadership meetings. So it's in a closed room with the people who report to them. And the questions are all about, you know, how can you get 10% more productivity improvement? Or are you sure you've done everything you need to do to get this done? It's challenging the people who report to the leader. And it's not really curiosity in the sense of wanting to learn more. It's wanting to make sure that the people are actually doing their jobs and kind of cracking the whip in terms of doing that. So I think the contrast for me is leaders in the privacy of their leadership meetings asking really hard questions, but very much focused on it's not something I don't know, it's something you need to know, and do you know it? Versus the way leaders act in a public setting. You know, when leaders give talks, they rarely ask questions. They provide all the answers. Here's where we're headed. Here's what we're going to do. Here are the results we're going to achieve. This is what's going to happen. And I don't think that's accidental. I think it's part of a much broader perspective that I've been working on now for more than a decade. It actually started with The Only Sustainable Edge. But it's the notion that we're in the early stages of what I call a big shift in the long-term forces that are reshaping the global economy. And I think we're in the early stages of a profound transformation, but early stages, a lot more to play out. And there are many ways of representing that big shift. But one way of representing it is we're moving from institutional models that are driven by scalable efficiency to models that are driven by scalable learning. And just to amplify on that for a minute, when we talk about scalable efficiency, it's all about how do you focus on cost reduction, becoming more efficient, doing things faster. But it's all about managing the cost and becoming more efficient at scale. The paradox, I believe, in the big shift is actually the approach that we've taken to scalable efficiency is becoming less and less efficient. It's more fragile, it's more vulnerable to disruption. On the other side, I think the institutional models that are going to succeed in the future are driven by what I would call scalable learning. And here I hasten to add, when I talk about learning, I'm not talking about training programs. I'm not talking about transferring existing knowledge. I'm talking about learning in the form of creating new knowledge by confronting entirely new situations and learning through action together with others. And in a rapidly changing world, the institutions that are going to succeed are those that learn faster at scale in that form of learning. And just to tie this back now to the leadership question, the contrast for me of leaders, if you look in the scalable efficiency world, what's the mark of a strong leader? It's someone who has an answer to all the questions. No matter what the question, you can count on the leader to have an answer. And by the way, if they don't have an answer, maybe it's time to get rid of them and get somebody who does have all the answers. In the scalable, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I should let you, please finish that thought, but then I'm going to do my editor thing, which I remember doing with you when we worked together, which is to insist that you give us an example. Because the other thing you are is a consultant, so you have a kind of a fly on the wall view, a better than fly on the wall view of a lot of these executive decisions that are being made. So would love to hear some more stories.
Yeah, sure. But the contrast I was going to make, so the scalable efficiency leader is the one who has the answer to all the questions. In the scalable learning model, the mark of a strong leader, I believe, is the one who has the most powerful questions and who will freely acknowledge they don't have an answer and that they need help. Can you help? Because that really draws out the inspiration to learn. Wow, there's a question here that we don't have an answer to. It's great, let's go for it. Let's find the answer. And so it cultivates that whole notion of wanting to learn, motivation to learn. And I think that's going to be very powerful in the world we're headed into. Again, if we're not learning faster, we're basically marginalized.
Okay, so now let's hear a great example of a leader who has promoted scalable learning and ideally did it by asking some powerful questions.
There aren't a lot of great examples because, again, my belief is we're still in the early stages of this transition, and most leaders of large companies are still very much in that model of, I need to have all the answers. I can't have any questions that I can't answer. So that's the mark of most leaders today. I'll give one example that illustrates the potential. It was actually about a decade ago. Domino's Pizza. They did customer satisfaction surveys and found out actually that their customers didn't like their pizzas. And I think most people, most leaders, having that kind of survey in front of them would say, keep that secret. Don't share that, and then punish the people who are doing the recipes to make sure that they get better recipes. In Domino's Pizza, they did something very countercultural, I think, to most companies. They went public with the survey. They said, hey, we found out most of our customers don't like our pizzas. What can we do to make better pizzas? Does anybody have any ideas or suggestions about new kinds of recipes or new approaches to making the pizzas that would make them much more appetizing for people? And it just generated this avalanche of suggestions and ideas, which really helped them to improve their recipes on their pizzas. But I think at a more fundamental level, it also just really generated a lot more trust among customers. Now here's a company who really has interesting questions and wants help in answering them, and we can help as customers. So I think it illustrates the potential of really opening up and saying, here's a question we don't have an answer to. We need help.
It is a good, it is a good example, and it's even more expansive because, kind of to the point of net gain all those years ago, it's about engaging that community out there that wants to be part of your value creation or could be part of your value creation. But the sad thing seems that leaders often don't do that even with within their organizations, like just within the boundaries, without going as far out as to the customer base or the supplier base. And it does strike me that, to bring Drucker in, because of course one always brings Drucker in at some point, his great coinage of the term knowledge worker was recognizing that, there's been this huge shift in economic history toward organizations full of knowledge workers. And connect those dots for me. Like, is powerful questions, is that just the better way to deal with a knowledge worker filled organization?
Yeah, I have to say I cringe a bit at the term knowledge worker, because it implies there are certain workers where knowledge is important, and there are other workers where knowledge is irrelevant. To me, again, this goes into the big shift. We need to redefine work at a fundamental level so that everybody becomes a knowledge worker. And what I mean by that is, as the technology takes over more and more of the routine tasks and tightly specified tasks that most work is today, it frees up capacity on the part of the workers to really do a different kind of work. And what I'm referring to is addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value wherever you are in the organization. You could be on an assembly line, you could be out in a warehouse, you could be out in a customer site. Wherever you are as a worker, what are the unseen problems and opportunities to create more value? And not just see the problems and opportunities, but address them and learn in the process. So we're all becoming knowledge workers in the sense of learning and creating new knowledge as we act to create more value wherever we are in the organization. I think that's ultimately, and a key part of that is curiosity, willingness to ask questions. If you don't ask questions, you're probably not going to see all the problems and opportunities that are out there.
I guess where my mind was going with that is that, you know, this term powerful questions, that raises a question itself, which is what makes a question powerful. And so I guess I'm thinking one thing that makes a question powerful is that it actually engages and inspires people who are engaged in some collective endeavor, your, you know, workforce, to think at a different level than they were thinking about their work. But I guess I'll just expand that question or throw it back at you. What would you say makes a question powerful?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that at the level of the leadership of an institution, this notion of powerful questions, in my mind, have two related components. One is they're focused on a really, really big opportunity that has not been seen before. And it's an inspiring opportunity that can motivate people to want to take risk. Because I think one of the big issues, and this is actually the focus of my new book, I'm just finished writing, which is that increasingly the dominant emotion that we are experiencing in our institutions and in our communities is fear. And one of the challenges for leaders is how do we inspire people in ways that will move them beyond fear and be willing to take risk to address a really big opportunity out there. And so by asking these inspiring questions, it helps people on that journey to move forward. And I think one of the challenges I see right now is, again, generalization, but many leaders are trying to drive change with what I call the burning platform message, right? If we don't change, we're going to die. Well, guess what? That feeds the fear. Oh my God, we're going to die? No, we need to hold on to what we have, what made us successful in the past. Don't change. Versus if I'm inspiring somebody with questions about, here's a really big opportunity, but we don't know how to go for it. What's going to be required to address this opportunity? Can you help? Now you get people moving forward and saying, this is really worth addressing. Let's go for it. And then coming together. And the more you get people to come together to answer these questions versus it's just you in that one room answering the question, it helps to overcome the fear as well, because you got other people who are similarly motivated and excited and wanting to help each other. So.
You know, it does strike me, you're a career-long consultant. You've spent your professional life inside consulting firms, you know, obviously in this very thoughtful and research-oriented role within those, but in a very consultative one. And it seems like if you grew up as a management consultant, questions, you know, that's your stock and trade. That's how you do your work. That's how you draw out the information you need from a new client opportunity or problem. But how, I mean, have you actually reflected on how you became a better questioner? And would you say this is something like, let's say a leader agrees that their job calls for asking more powerful questions. How do they get better at that? Is that a skill that you can improve? Does it take deliberate practice, or how would you do it?
No, I think it definitely takes some deliberate practice. It's cultivating what I call the capability of curiosity. But I think in my case, I mean, one of the things that has helped me to frame questions that have been helpful to clients is an approach that I call zoom out, zoom in. It's on the one side, looking ahead quite a distance, 10 to 20 years, zoom out and really try to understand the forces that are shaping the environment, what kinds of opportunities are emerging that are very different from anything that we have today, and use that to frame some of the opportunities and questions about those opportunities, challenge this notion of here's the business we're in, this is the business we're going to be in. no, you know, if anybody understands exponential change and believes that 10 to 20 years from now, they're going to be in the same business as they are today, I challenge them to really understand what exponential change means. But then the zoom in side is really focusing on what can we do in the short term to really have impact and accelerate our movement towards that longer term opportunity and learn in the process. So what actions will help us to learn faster to get to that really big opportunity? And I think both of those together really help to drive powerful questions that can motivate people for action, not just conversation in a boardroom somewhere.
Okay, in a minute or two, I'm going to open the floor and ask and start calling on people who've put questions into chat. So I'm just giving a forewarning that if a question has occurred to you, this is a good moment to do that. But before I move to the open floor, John, I just think, you know, this is a rare opportunity to take someone who thinks for a living about management issues and just ask you about your trade craft, you know, like, or how do you do what you do? I love the zoom in, zoom out, and presumably that's just how you do your job. Do you have any other tips, kind of trade craft kind of advice for the rest of us?
Well, I think one thing that has helped me along the way and is it's striking a balance. On the one hand, you know, I have been a consultant working on specific problems and issues that a client has. And on the other side, I've been leading major research initiatives. And I think it's the combination of the two. I find that people who just do research often become pretty abstract, conceptual, theoretical. And people who just focus on working with clients become so granular and you know, narrow in their focus that they lose sight of the broader changes that are occurring. And it's that combination of being able to step back from those client situations and look for broader patterns and questions that are emerging from the changing world out there, but then being forced to really apply that and learn through action again with clients around what's really going to have impact and what isn't. That to me has been very powerful for a way to stay ahead of the game.
And what about influences? Like I remember years ago, Tom Davenport and Larry Pruzak fielded a survey of people like you, and the name of the survey was "The Guru's Gurus." So it's like, you know, we're asking you, as a thinker, who made you a better thinker, either because you read their work or you were mentored by them directly?
Well, I'll resist the temptation to mention Drucker because certainly he was a strong influence on me. I mean, very much focused on the human element of business, which I think is something that gets lost in the scalable efficiency mindset and model is for all human beings ultimately, and that's what's going to be required to achieve impact. But I think, you know, I've been in Silicon Valley now for 40 years, and I would say that having interaction with technologists who are on the edge, who are really driving new generations of technology before they ever get into the business world, has been very helpful in influencing my thinking and focusing me on opportunities that are emerging. So I would say certainly that's been a big influence as well. And then just, you know, looking for edges. I always, you know, for 13 years, I ran a research center called the Center for the Edge. And my belief was that emerging opportunities come in on edges. It could be geographic edges, emerging economies. I spend a lot of time in emerging economies looking at unmet needs and changing situations there. I look at demographic edges, younger generations coming into the workforce and into the consumer marketplace. What are their unmet needs? Technology edges. I mean, there are a variety of edges that I think if you really invest the time to go out there, even though it can make you uncomfortable, it takes you beyond your comfort zone, it can be very stimulating and really open up your eyes to some new questions that you hadn't thought about.
Great. Well, without taking up any more of the time myself and more of the oxygen here in my small room, let's bring some other people into the conversation. Now, there is, perhaps you've even seen in the chat function, is it Winfried Friesler? Velser, sorry. If I've got that name right, or if you recognized it, can you unmute yourself and ask the question yourself? Winfried or Winfried. Well, I'll go ahead and restate it and we can start that way. So it's Elon Musk is the question, just Elon Musk question. Ah, here we go. Go ahead.
Ah. Whoa.
We can't hear. We can't hear. You're going to need to be closer to your mic or. You know, it's all right. I'll just rephrase it. I mean, I think it's perfect. It's perfectly clear here. Elon Musk starts with a vision and questions and relies on the intelligence of his ecosystem. Is that something you agree with, or, you know, as a Musk watcher, what would you say about his powerful questioning capacity?
You know, I don't know Elon well. I've certainly met him and had some interaction with him. I think there's a balance in Elon. On the one side, definitely curiosity and willingness to ask questions, but on the other side, a very clear sense of where he's going and what needs to be done. And, you know, it's tends to, at some level, discourage the questions because, you know, I know where we're going. So it's a balance that, depending on the context and situation, he's either in questioning mode or execution mode in terms of let's just get to it and execute. So okay. I think it's an interesting combination.
Now I'm going to bring in Goran Carlson. Can you unmute and ask your question of John?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. Yeah, so first my compliments to you, John. I've been a big fan and I've probably read everything about the future of work. And so I'm the futurist of TCS in Europe. So I just wanted to hear your perspectives towards, I mean, your narratives that you have shared today is aligned with the future of work. I mean, taking the questions, the empathy processes to get people motivated, etc. But how do you think this will sort of change the future of jobs, job roles, and also education?
Wow. Yeah. Well, again, it addresses a lot of the research that I've done over the past several years. In particular, I do think there is, you know, everybody talks about the future of work. Very few people actually talk about what does work need to be. It's all about reskilling, or it's all about gig economy, but what's the work itself going to be? And I think that's the core question. And to me, again, there's this big shift from the way work is done in scalable efficiency institutions, which is tightly specify every task, highly standardize every task, tightly integrate every task. That's what work is in most large institutions, in most departments. Yeah, we have an innovation lab somewhere over on the side, but everybody else just, you know, do your tasks. I believe increasingly those tasks are going to be taken by the machine, by technology, and this opportunity to redefine work and say it's addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value everywhere, in every part of the organization. My favorite example is janitors in buildings. They have much greater insight about how these buildings are being used than anybody else. And they know the problems and opportunities in those buildings. If only we did this or did that, we could create a much more productive environment where people could be much more satisfied. They're too busy doing their routine tasks right now. So I think in all parts of the organization, and that leads to another piece on the future of work, which again, I tend to be a bit of a contrarian. Everybody's talking about reskilling. We're all going to need to acquire new skills, and that's the key to success. Very few people are talking about cultivating capabilities. And to me, there's a distinction. The skills are valuable in a very specific context. How to operate this machine in this environment, that's a skill. Capabilities are valuable in any context. Curiosity, imagination, creativity, empathy, those are valuable anywhere. And we don't focus on cultivating those in the workers. And I think ultimately the workers who cultivate those capabilities are going to be the ones that acquire skills at a much more rapid rate and be much more effective at addressing unseen problems and opportunities to create more value. So again, I think a missed opportunity there in terms of really what's going to be required to learn faster.
Okay, how about a question from Tatiana Mamut, who I can tell had her interest piqued by your next project focused on fear. Am I right, Tatiana? Is that what inspired your question?
Absolutely. So on the topic of leadership, I think one of the foundational roots of that is Machiavelli, right? When he taught leaders, princes, that fear, if you have to choose between being feared and being loved, choose fear. Fear is a more powerful motivator, the love or hope. So what is the deep work? Since that has a centuries, it's not a new idea, right? It's a centuries old idea. It's based on our belief in Western culture around what good leadership looks like. What is the deep work we need to do to start to shift away from fear and the belief, all of our belief, our collective cultural belief that fear is the most powerful motivator?
Ah, boy. Well, again, that's what motivated me to write this new book is this notion that, again, the dominant emotion, and by the way, I started writing this several years ago, way before the current pandemic. So fear, as I traveled around the world, I was feeling the fear everywhere. In the very senior leaders, down in the frontline organization, out in the community. And I think while you're right, I think many of us have a sense that fear is a powerful motivator. I keep coming back to say, tell me one person who really has an aspiration to live in fear. I think we all have a hunger for hope, and no one is addressing that hunger, but it's there. And again, it's a longer conversation, it's part of the book, but I've looked at movements for social change throughout history, different parts of the world, different periods of history. There's one common element in all the movements for change that were successful. They framed what I call an opportunity-based narrative. They framed an inspiring opportunity that could motivate people and make them willing to overcome their fear and take action and have impact together. And I think that's something that we should learn from is that we all have that hunger for hope. And that's actually a much more effective driver. I'll just say too, just as an aside, back to future work, everybody talks about lifelong learning. Nobody talks about what's the motivation for lifelong learning. The unstated assumption is it's fear. If you don't learn, you're going to lose your job. So get to it, study the manual. Guess what? While I think fear can be a motivator for learning, it's nowhere near as powerful as somebody who's really excited about learning and wants to learn, needs to learn. How do we cultivate that? It's something that I call the passion of the explorer that I think is within all of us, but needs to be drawn out. And we unfortunately have environments and cultures today that view passion as deeply suspect. Passionate people ask questions. Passionate people take risks. They deviate from the script. No, we don't want passionate people. Get somebody who can just do their job. They got passion, do it as a hobby outside, after work. But, so I'm sorry I go on and on, but it's it is a core question of this notion of what is the motivator ultimately that's going to make motivate people to really make a difference. And right now, I see us all as, and it's a vicious cycle. The more we develop fear, the more it leads to behaviors that intensify the fear. And so you get this increasing fear that doesn't lead to a great world, that's for sure.
John, I like that phrase, opportunity-based narrative, and it makes me think about social movements. And, you know, there is a whole kind of discipline devoted to studying social movements and how they take off. And is that the kind of thing you have in mind when you say that? Or like, what would be your favorite example of an opportunity-based narrative?
Well, I'll give you one that, again, I think is just part of the book is about the concept of narrative. And how much time? We don't have a lot of time. I make a big distinction between stories and narratives. Most people use them to mean the same thing. I think narratives are very different from stories. And the key is narratives are open-ended. They're about something out in the future, not yet achieved, not clear whether it's going to be achieved, resolution to be determined. And the resolution hinges on a call to action to you. What choices, what actions are you going to take? And I'll just say, a good example, I think most companies do not have a narrative in the way I talk about it. One company that did in the early days was Apple. And the narrative they had was condensed into a slogan, which was think different. But if you unpack the slogan, it was for decades, we had technology that took away our names, gave us numbers, made us cogs in a machine. Now, for the first time, there's a generation of technology that can allow us to express our unique individuality and potential. But it's not going to happen automatically. You need to think different. Are you going to think different? It was a call to action to those outside the company. And it really didn't talk about Apple. It was about you, the customer, and what the opportunity was if you thought different. And I think it's the reason why for many people, Apple became the equivalent of a religion. Deep attachment, because they were speaking to an aspiration that many of us had. And I think I use it as an example of what can be accomplished with opportunity-based narratives. That, and again, particularly in a world that's driven by fear, the more you can articulate an opportunity-based narrative, the more I think you'll draw people in, because we have a hunger for the opportunity and don't want to be consumed by the threats.
We have a few minutes left here, and by the way, I see Kim Korn is amongst us. Kim, you gotta jump in at some point. I'm dying to hear what you make of this conversation.
Well, first off, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. First off, I've been a great student of John's, whether he knows it or not. And I really embraced his idea of narrative over story, and how it inspires and captures the imagination and pulls you forward. And I've been absorbing all this and just putting all the pieces together that I've assembled earlier. And I just love the message that you have about that shift from that scalable efficiency to scalable learning. And I work with a startup that that's about where I spend about a third of my time. And we are very much a learning enterprise and have been from the very beginning. And we implement many of these kinds of ideas in our practices as we go forward.
It prompts an observation, again, from my experience in Silicon Valley. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurial companies over the years. And one of the things that I find most discouraging is that as an entrepreneurial company becomes successful and starts to scale, the message from the investors is you need adult supervision. We need to bring in experienced managers who can help you scale this. And the way to scale it is scalable efficiency.
Right.
Crush all that innovation and experimentation and learning, get the tasks into a process manual and distribute it. And that's the key to success.
And every person we add to the enterprise, I have the discussion with them along with the two owner partners that say, it will surprise you that we're focusing already on regenerating the enterprise now, even before we've achieved anything that looks like the kind of scale that will be highly visible success, because that will be what brings us that future. You know, we don't want to flame out. We don't want to be a TiVo or a Blockbuster or any number of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. I wanted to bring in one other thing that is back to this issue of powerful questions and why they're so important for leaders. And it gets to the issue of trust. You know, I think that one of the things we all have seen the surveys showing that trust is eroding in all of our institutions around the world, not just companies, governments, education, you know, NGOs. Trust is eroding in everything. Nobody's asking the question why. And I do think one of the answers, I don't think it's the complete answer, but one answer is if you have leaders who are standing up and saying, I have the answer to all the questions. There are two possibilities about that leader. One is they have no clue about how the world is changing, or they're lying.
Yep.
In either case, I don't trust them. Sorry. And I think one way to build trust, that has been demonstrated in a lot of research, is to express vulnerability and to say, I don't know, and to ask for help. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of our.
And we have a very highly respected leadership in the founder of this company who knows the industry. But in our weekly management meetings, that includes all the staff, he asks more questions than he provides answers. And we trust him implicitly.
It's interesting, isn't it? How you start to recognize at some point that there are people in your life or amongst your colleagues who are just really good at putting the right question on the table. And it's sort of something that's always been in the background, but does feel like we need to more explicitly recognize the tremendous value of that and get more people thinking about how do I bring that value to the encounters I have with other people, spur their thinking with the right question.
Yeah, earlier especially, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
They talked about you need to be vulnerable to build trust. And that's certainly what this guy does in our meetings. And, you know, we sometimes joke about it. It's his therapy session. yet he and the rest of the team is all stronger for it in the end.
I was
John,
just
last word for 1 minute, and then I can't believe it, we're almost out of time, but.
No, and unfortunately, I think I just blanked on what I was going to say, but you remind me what you just said in terms of, Julia, in terms of, curiosity. Yeah, I think one of the challenges I get from people when I talk about capabilities like curiosity, imagination, creativity is, okay, some of us have that capability, but most of us just want to be told what to do. My answer to that, it's let's go to a playground and watch children 6 or 7 years old. Show me one that doesn't have curiosity, imagination, and creativity. We all had it as human beings, and we all have it. It's like a muscle. If we don't exercise it, it atrophies, but it's there waiting to be exercised. And I think we need to create environments that will encourage the exercise of those capabilities.
All right, you know what? I think I'm going to end on something that came from our little mini community that we created here in NetGain kind of spirit. And that's Warren Levitan saying, someone smart once said something like, a well-put problem is half the solution. And I think that's exactly the power of the question. framing the problem correctly in the first place is work half done. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Sophie again, our host, and she will do a little housekeeping for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And with the spirit of this collaborative discussion that we just had, I would ask all our listeners to please put into the chat one insight, or maybe it's a question that you're taking away from this discussion so we can end on your voice as well. And then in terms of some housekeeping, we are ending the Thinkers Corners for now, and we're ending today on a very celebratory note. So after this, I would invite you all to our plenary, where we will be celebrating this year's winners of the Drucker Challenge, and then afterwards the impact of Clayton Christensen.